Ritz in Korea. These are dummies for display. So, former RAF TriStar pilot Scott. Just a...
Bird Dog Cosford display clear, takeoff and display clear to 1008, wind 27005, report last pass.
Clear takeoff display, Bird Dog.
Copy.
Ja. Ja, Taskname je to celý.
And there it goes. And indeed, a very short takeoff for this aircraft, which was adapted from the civilian Cessna 170 to meet a US Army need for a new aircraft for the observation, fire control and liaison roles. Importantly, it was to be of all-metal construction, to replace the likes of the earlier Type L4 and Stinson L5, designs that had dated from World War II. First flew in 1949 into service with the US Army the following year, and the US Army's bird dogs, called L-19s at that point, went straight into action in the Korean War. They were also flown by observation squadrons of the US Marine Corps in Korea, and only one bird dog was actually flown by the RAF, by a single RAF flight operating in Korea, and it was deemed superior to the Oscar AOP-6s that were otherwise being flown by the Brits in Korea. But nonetheless, the Oscar soldiered on. We only ever flew that one bird dog. You can see here, it's a very manoeuvrable platform at low level.
I think we should really just remember the role of this aircraft, because what it's doing now is what it did in its war role, but it did this right over the heads of the enemy. Its main job was to spot the positions of the enemy and then pass that information back to various platforms. That could be 4 F4s about to tip in and drop a lot of bombs. It could be to a ship out at sea to fire a salvo of 16-inch caliber shells. It could be artillery pieces, but its job was to get very low, very close to the enemy, and then pass that information back.
Yeah, the Forward Air Controller Airborne, as we now call it, FAC-A. So capabilities that we're seeing, very manoeuvrable, good slow speed handling, is exactly what it needs for that role. How the P-47 could withstand a lot of battle damage, that was true of this, what might appear to be light aeroplane. In 1952, flying in Korea, one US Army bird dog had 12 feet of its starboard wing shot off by anti-aircraft artillery, but it was repaired and it flew again the next day.
And the courage of the crew of this aircraft. The side windows are actually canted out, so you can stick your head out and look down. There's a transparency on top of the wing, so you can look up. They must have felt very, very vulnerable.
They certainly must have, and when these aircraft went on to fly in the Vietnam War, by which time the US Army had turned most of its bird dogs over to the US Air Force, and they were now known as the O-1, O for observation. 469 bird dogs were lost by all the operators that flew them there. Some did remain in US Army service, but mostly they were turned over to the Air Force. They were also flown there by the US Marine Corps, by the South Vietnamese, by Air America on behalf of the CIA. Now, I mentioned the colour scheme on this one is that of South Vietnam, and it represents one of the most fascinating bits of the whole bird dog story. It's painted as the aircraft of Major Buang Lee of the South Vietnamese Air Force, who on the morning of the 30th of April 1975 took off from Con Son Island to escape the end of fighting in South Vietnam as the North Vietnamese overran Southern Territory, and of course Saigon was evacuated. He flew his little bird dog out over the South China Sea, hoping to find a US Navy carrier to land on. And he ended up doing so. He landed on USS Midway, and it was the first bird dog ever to touch down on an aircraft carrier.
Now I admit we have a fairly brisk wind today, but that is a very slow speed pass.
It is indeed, and hopefully we'll have given you the chance to look at some of the equipment this bird dog is carrying. Under the wings, you might have noticed it's got 8 2.5-inch incendiary rockets, which were known as Willy Peeps. Of course, these are dummies for display purposes. Those were used for part of the role that Andy was describing earlier, marking enemy positions. And on top of the wing, you can see there's a huge 8-foot-tall whip antenna, and that was used so that the aircraft could maintain communications with ground stations when it was getting very low down over the battlefield. For example, low literally into the jungle canopy or amongst the weeds.
I mean, by bird dog standards, this is quite a high altitude display. It really would be right down there, very low. And target marking, it just makes me think of the Pathfinders during the Second World War. So very similar, dropping flares, dropping something that illuminates a point. Even if that's not the exact target, it can be used as a marker that then can be relayed. See my flares, left, 400 yards.
Yeah. It's one of the reasons aircraft like this definitely have to be categorised as warbirds, just like the Spitfires, just like the Hurricanes, just like the Mustangs and so forth.
And if you're the enemy and you have one of these above you, it's a prime target because you know what that aircraft is doing. If it sees you, it will call up some support, be it from the air, be it from the ground, be it from sea. So yeah, these were prime targets aircraft, the enemy. And then helicopters as well, more recent aircraft but still doing the same role, which was really the first ever role of air power, all the way back to the First World War.
Yes.
Seeing over the enemy's trenches, over their line, what are they doing? Are my shells hitting the enemy or are they not?
Yeah, it was the, as you say, it was one of the bedrocks of air power from the beginning, but this use of high-wing light aeroplanes really dates from the run-up to World War II and a British artillery officer called Jack Parham, who had a little Aeronca C2 of his aviation arm, the Aviation Légère de l'Armée de Terre. It was sold onto the civil market in the 1990s. It's been through a few owners in the UK. It's currently part of the fleet of Kennett Aviation, established by that great enthusiast of vintage aviation, particularly post-war types, of which he's had a good few pass through his hands. Tim Manor, home of the Shuttleworth collection in Bedfordshire, and in fact, at the controls today for that very nice display of the L19E Bird Dog was one of the Shuttleworth collection pilots, former RAF TriStar pilot Scott Butler. Fabulous.
Just a reminder that there's a very important rendezvous point we should point out. It is the yellow and white striped marquee, which is in front of our commentary position, but more importantly, and what you should see, is it's in front of the air traffic control tower here at RAF Cosford. It is our information point. It's also a lost and found rendezvous point. If you've lost an item, or if you've lost...
1020,
Bird dog, continue across the ground 135.880.
135, 880, Bird dog.
So, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're about to go back to the Royal Air Force for the next display, and to tell you all about it, here is Flying Officer Seb Wilson.
Hello, good afternoon everyone, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the 2025 Royal Air Force Tutor Display. My name is Flying Officer Seb Wilson and I'm the Tutor Display Manager this season. It's a pleasure to display the Grob Tutor for you all today. And now, flying in towards us from the centre at nearly 200 miles an hour is the Tutor Display Pilot, Flight Lieutenant Bob Hughes.